Hi, my name is Matt Abedi. I've been a performer at the Magnet Theater, or I've been in and around the theater for about a decade. House teams that I've been on have done the Spokane. Mostly doing this video for a friend of mine, but if anybody else gets any value out of it or is just curious about my take or getting multiple takes on a Spokane, or I've also heard it called Pretty Flower Spokane. Hopefully this video will be a good starting point for you, or just give you a different perspective on that format if you're interested in doing it with you and your improv team. So first, we'll talk about the high level structure of Spokane. So a Spokane is, I like to think of it as a mono scene with herald third beats. So we're gonna see a scene, maybe it's a bunch of people moving out of their house. And somewhere in that scene, we discover something like one of the characters says, you know, every time I lie, I get a nosebleed. And then someone might tag everyone out of the monoscene. We'll leave the monoscene and we're going to go to a new scene. And that person might be like, hey, you know, honey, where were you? You know, you weren't cheating on me. You weren't cheating on me, were you? And that character goes, no, and then blood flies out. And then we do another tag, and we go a little bit further out, and we put that character on the stand inside of a courtroom. We say, you know, did you kill this person? And that person says, of course I didn't, and blood flies out. Once we've explored that idea enough, with some clever editing, we'll all return to the mono scene and we'll continue right where we left off in time, and we're going to be moving this person out of their home. So that's the high level structure of a Spokane, and we'll talk about its individual parts. So the most important part to me of a Spokane, Pretty Flower, I want to call it a Spokane, is the mono scene. If there isn't a really strong mono scene in the center, it'll be a really chaotic show. It'll feel very unstable. It'll feel like you're working really hard to come up with jokes. You want to avoid that. There are a bunch of different types of mono scenes. I'll just list a couple here. You can use a lifeboat, a pinata style mono scene. You can do an enter and exit style mono scene. I'm sure there are other variations. Those are variations that I know about. You can use any of these. I'm just going to focus in on a lifeboat mono scene. A lifeboat mono scene, by the way, is all members of the team are in the mono scene and none of them leave. So no entering, no exiting. Everyone's on stage for the entirety of the mono scene. The goal of the mono scene is to play grounded, sustainable characters. So if your character has a game that will burn them out really, really quickly, let's say they're, I mean, I don't know, they scream over and over and over again. It's hard to play that character for the entirety of the mono scene. So just be wary of playing characters that are very gamey. I always like to think of it as a test of, like, if you met that person in real life, would you wonder how they can survive because they're so wacky and they're so out of this world. So grounded, sustainable play. It means whenever you return from each spoke, the scene is going to be rich, and you'll have tons of places to find more joke opportunities, learn about the characters. A couple tips for the mono scene. First, I would say start in the middle of something. One of the most dangerous things I think you can do inside of Spokane is it's just 8 people sitting on a couch. What's going to happen there is people are going to have to pitch each other ideas to be able to spoke out. In my experience, it means that people are going to work really hard to abandon this core scene because nothing's happening in this core scene, and we'll do a lot of joke pitching. So try to avoid that. And the best way of avoiding that is, you know, we're at a funeral. You know, we're moving out of a home. Who knows? We're buying our first car for our teenager. Someone's getting married. So these are larger events, and it'll inform what kind of characters are there, give you a lot of forward momentum. The second one is, I would say, do your best to explore as many of the characters as possible. if you do a scene and you just focus in on one character and all their goofiness and weirdness, it makes the format seem lopsided. And also it's just a nice thing to do for the other players. You're also more likely to find, rich and more diverse games to play because these 3 characters will be different from this 4th one. Okay, the next one is remember that you're returning to the same slice of time. I'm not going to get too deep into this topic. Experiment with this format. One of the challenges that I've seen and my team has had is sometimes you create weird time paradoxes. Someone dies somewhere in the past, and then they have to return to the mono scene. We have to explain why that person is alive despite dying. You can obviously solve those kinds of problems, but it's easier, in my experience, to have the spokes be in the future or in the past than it is for the mono scene to move into the future or into the past. So keeping the mono scene in the same slice of time will give your Spokane a lot of stability, and it'll also, like I mentioned, if someone dies in the past and we come back to the mono scene, we can deal with the problem that person died in the past, or if they died in the future, that that person, we don't have a paradox there. But if we move the mono scene somewhere in time, it causes all sorts of confusion. So try to avoid moving where in time we're in the mono scene, or to put it in a better way, anytime you return to the mono scene, remember you're returning to that slice of time, that moment in time. I'm going to regret this example, but think of Family Guy. Right, someone says something in Family Guy, we cut away, we see that joke, and then we come right back to, Peter in a car or whatever else he's doing. Okay, spokes. So like I mentioned, we're gonna have that mono scene, we're gonna tag people out, and we're gonna wanna explore ideas. There are lots of ways of exploring ideas inside of the mono scene. I'm gonna focus in on 2 variations that I think work really well inside of a Spokane. The first one are games. Anybody who's read the UCB manual probably has an opinion on what a game is. I've heard a dozen ways that game is explained. So I'm just going to give you an example of a game and just say whatever you think a game is, that works. Personally for me, I always like to think of game as some sort of logic, some sort of internal logic that we can play over and over again. So my example that I'm going to use here is someone who gets a nosebleed every time they lie. So we'll tag folks out, and we're gonna explore that game. We're gonna take that little bit of logic and see it in different places, or see heightened consequences of it. So those are games. The next one are exploration moves. So an exploration move might be something like someone says, yeah, and someone in the mono scene says, yeah, I killed a guy once. And then we jump out to see, maybe the fallout. Oh my God, I can't believe I killed this person or whatever else. And we might, further explore the consequences of that. We might find games along the way, but in this situation, we're learning about the character. So that's what I think of as an exploration move. Those are my ideas around game moves. I'm sure there are other categories, but those 2 categories are the ones that I've noticed work the best inside of a Spokane. I'll also say this, games can go as far out as you want, and then the game doesn't have to stay the same. So if we're doing this thing where we find out that this guy gets a nosebleed every time he lies, and partway through we find a new game, whatever that is, you're allowed to follow that new idea. The only real rule is at a certain point, whenever you've gone as far as you want to go, we're going to jump back to the mono scene. So don't worry about how long a tag run goes, how many times you explore that idea, or whatever else it is. Whenever you tag, whenever you're finished doing the tags, you're gonna run back into the mono scene. Couple tips for doing the spokes. Number 1 is avoid things that are kind of manufactured. What do I mean by that? Someone inside of the mono scene says it's as hot here as a hula hoop dancer on the equator. And then we cut away and we see a hula hoop dancer on the equator or whatever else. I'm not gonna say this stuff isn't gonna get a laugh. It's just a better opportunity. They're richer, funnier jokes. If we learn about the characters and somewhere along the mono scene, we find a little snag that we are like, okay, we need to learn more about that. That's interesting. The number 2 is don't start tagging too early in your show. Spend a good chunk of time, whatever that looks like for your team, inside of the mono scene, establishing the location, who people are, what's going on. You have to live in that mono scene for a good while, because when you return to it, you're gonna want to have things already in motion. You don't want to land back in that mono scene and still be doing that foundational work of like, where are we? Who is dad? Who is mom? What relationships exist? How are people feeling? We want to have that work already done so that whenever we return, you'll probably get like a secondary joke because knowing that someone is mom and exploring something about mom usually comes up with something that is interesting or special. The last one is feel free to make connections at any time in a Spokane. I've heard this note about a Herald, which is don't make connections too early, or I've heard it with a format like the Cat's Cradle. I would say with a Spokane, you can make connections super early. What do I mean by connection? So I'll use that example again. One person says, I lived in an ant farm. I lived in an ant farm for several years of my life. We explore what that looked like, that person went to school in an ant farm. And then we find out that his roommate, he meets his roommate and he goes, hey, did you eat my ramen noodles? And the guy goes, no, and then his nose bleeds. That would be a connection where we found one set of games, one spoke, which was this guy who gets a nosebleed every time he lies, running into another spoke, which is this person who spent a chunk of his life in the ant farm. That's a connection. Feel free to make those pretty early. I think it adds richness to the mono scene. Okay, the next piece we'll talk about here is editing. Everyone has their own way of editing. These are just the conventions that I really like. So if you have something that you prefer, I would say do that. Whenever you're tagging out of the mono scene, in my experience, it's good to do a wave of some variety and then point at whatever characters or whoever you want inside of your spoke, your scene, exploring that idea or exploring that game. Another thing that I've seen is you can tag one person out or tag 2 people out, and as they're exiting, point at who you want. So those are 2 options, 2 ways that I've done it and I've seen it. The second one is whenever we're outside, we're outside the mono scene and we're inside the first scene outside of the spoke, or maybe the second or third or whatever else it is. We can just do a normal tag out. Usually there are going to be only a couple people on stage, so you can just tag one person and point, or do what I mentioned earlier, right? Do a bigger wave and point again. So those are some ways of tagging out of the mono scene, and then each subsequent scene out of the Spokane. And then how to signal that we're going to return. Someone thinks it's time for us to return to the mono scene. I like this hand motion, right? Everyone, return. I'm sure, again, other people have their own methods or ways of doing that. That's just my favorite way. Okay, some conclusion ideas, some coaching tips, some ways I think it's good to work on the Spokane. Number 1, again, I'm gonna say this. I'm really gonna pound this. I'm gonna really hammer this point home, and that is that you should train the mono scene. In my opinion, a good Spokane team should be able to do a mono scene for at least, so if you usually do a 25-minute show, I think you should be able to do a mono scene that lasts at least 15 minutes without any tag outs. Super ideally, that team never has to spoke out. They could do a mono scene for the full show, for the full 25 minutes. Again, that's a sign, at least to me, that all of those characters are rich, they can live for a really long time, and if we were to explore, if we were to leave that scene and return, there will be enough meat, there will be enough of a foundation that we'll want to be in that scene, we'll want to continue forward. So again, if you're an indie team, maybe your shows are only 12 minutes or 15 minutes. In that situation, again, I would say 60% of what you normally, what is your normal time, you should be able to do the mono scene. So if it's only a 15-minute show, you should be able to do a mono scene for at least 10 minutes without having to do a spoke or bail. The next tip is, I would say you have to really focus on strengthening your initiations. So whenever you tag people out and you point, get really good at explaining your idea fully. And sometimes you have to be a little ham-fisted about it. What do I mean by that? It can be as intense as saying like, hey, I'm your roommate, we're in the dorm. I know for a fact that whenever you lie, you get a nosebleed. And I'm sorry, I know you have finals, but I gotta do this to you. Did you eat my ramen noodles? And then your scene partner knows it's time for the nosebleed. So the bigger danger is to not fully give the other person the idea that you're going for. So really try to be very clear about what you think is funny or what idea you want to explore. Work on those initiations, spend time in practice, making sure that people who are starting spokes are very clear with their ideas. Not to mention, every scene as we're following that spoke. And the last really big tip is establish the location very early and respect the space. What do I mean by respect the space is if we establish that there's a table, don't walk through the table. If we say that we're inside of a fire station, we're inside of a fire station. Remember, whenever we're returning from our spoke, that's where we are. We're in the fire station. And very early in the mono scene, I would say, establish the location. I won't get fully into it, but it helps so much to know where you are and know the features of that space, so that whenever you return to it, or if you're doing an enter and exit mono scene, people understand what they're entering and exiting out of, or what it means to walk in through a door. So what do I mean by that? If we're in a private eye's office, someone walking in through a door is a little bit more invasive. How is this person just barging into my office? But if it's like we're in the back alley and someone opens up the door, that might be the owner or the manager of the restaurant we all work at, or whatever else it is. So location, again, gives us richness. It tells us who the characters are. It gives us constraints as to how people can act and behave. Having a location very, very early on is a very good step for the mono scene and will give you a lot of organic joke opportunities. In any case, I hope this video has been helpful. If you have any questions and you're my friend, you can DM me or leave a comment, and I'll do my best to give you an answer. End of video.